courtroom was a grand but cold place, its walls lined with shelves of imposing legal volumes that seemed to judge everyone who entered. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, illuminating the stern face of Judge Harold Whitman. Known for his iron-clad rulings, Whitman prided himself on being tough on crime. But today the courtroom held its breath for another reason. 17-year-old Marcus Carter, a lanky black teenager with a kind smile and weary eyes, stood in the defendant's box. Marcus wasn't a criminal. His teachers called him a math whiz. His neighbors trusted him to babysit their kids. He had dreams of becoming an engineer, inspired by his late father, who used to fix anything with moving parts. But in this town, dreams often collided with harsh realities. Marcus lived in a predominantly black neighborhood, plagued by over-policing and profiling, and he knew better than most how quickly life could change. 2 months earlier, Marcus had been arrested while walking home from his part-time job at the local diner. The police said he matched the description of a suspect in a convenience store robbery. Black, male, wearing a hoodie. That was all it took. Despite his alibi, the officers handcuffed him on the spot. His mother, Deborah, had fought tooth and nail to gather enough money for a lawyer, but Marcus's case had landed in Judge Whitman's courtroom, a place where justice seemed to tilt against people like him. As Marcus stood silently, his hands trembling at his sides, he thought about his little sister Mia, who had hugged him that morning and whispered, "You'll come home, right?" He wanted to believe her, but the prosecutor painted a damning picture, wielding security footage that showed someone running from the store, their face obscured by shadows. "This young man fits the profile," the prosecutor said, as if that was all the proof anyone needed. The courtroom was filled with murmurs, a mix of skepticism and resignation. Deborah sat in the gallery, clutching her cross necklace so tightly her knuckles turned white. Marcus's lawyer argued valiantly, but it was clear the judge had already made up his mind. "Marcus Carter," Judge Whitman said, his gavel poised in his hand, "I hereby sentence you to 15 years in a state correctional facility." The words echoed like a gunshot. Deborah gasped audibly, her body slumping forward as though the weight of the sentence had physically struck her. Marcus blinked in disbelief, the tears he had fought so hard to suppress now streaming freely. Protest rippled through the gallery. "This isn't justice," someone yelled before being quickly escorted out by security. But Judge Whitman barely flinched. To him, Marcus was another statistic, another number to fill the prison system's quota. Marcus was led away in handcuffs, his mother's cries echoing in his ears. But the real turning point came days later, when a journalist named Sofia Ramirez, who had been sitting in the back of the courtroom, started digging. Sofia was no stranger to exposing systemic corruption, and something about Marcus's case didn't sit right with her. She reviewed the security footage frame by frame and noticed something. The figure running from the store wore a hoodie, but their build was broader, their gait different from Marcus's. Sofia dug deeper, requesting police records and interviewing witnesses who the police hadn't bothered to speak to. Slowly but surely, she began to uncover cracks in the prosecution's case and an unsettling pattern in Judge Whitman's courtroom history. Sofia's hands trembled slightly as she pored over the court transcripts late into the night. Her tiny apartment was littered with notes, legal documents, and highlighted articles. A framed photo of her late father, a community activist, sat on the desk beside her laptop. He had always told her, never turn away from the truth, no matter how ugly it is. It was his voice that drove her forward, even when the odds seemed stacked against her. Her instincts told her there was more to Marcus's case than sloppy police work. Digging into public records, Sofia unearthed a disturbing trend. Judge Whitman's sentencing patterns showed a stark racial disparity. Over the past decade, Black and Latino defendants in his courtroom had received sentences that were on average 40% longer than their white counterparts for similar crimes. Fueled by this discovery, Sofia reached out to Anthony Green, a seasoned civil rights attorney. Anthony was initially reluctant. Cases like this are uphill battles, he warned. You're not just fighting a ruling, you're fighting a system that's designed to protect itself. But as Sophia presented her findings, his skepticism gave way to resolve. Meanwhile, Marcus was grappling with the grim realities of life behind bars. The first few days were a blur of fear and confusion, but Marcus quickly learned the unspoken rules of survival. He kept to himself, avoiding trouble, but his quiet demeanour caught the attention of Jamal, an older inmate with a sharp wit and a soft spot for underdogs. "You don't belong here," Jamal told him one evening in the dimly lit common area. "None of us do, really. But you, kid, you've got a light about you. Don't let this place snuff it out." Jamal introduced Marcus to a small group of inmates who believed in change. They shared stories of wrongful convictions and the broken system that had landed them there. Inspired, Marcus joined their efforts to collect signatures for a petition, demanding a review of cases with questionable evidence. It was a small act of defiance, but it gave him a sense of purpose. Outside the prison walls, Deborah was relentless. She juggled her job as a nurse with attending rallies and speaking at community meetings. "My son is not a criminal," she declared to a crowd gathered outside the courthouse. Her voice cracked, but her resolve was unshakable. "And I won't rest until everyone knows it." Her words struck a chord, and soon others began to rally behind Marcus's case. Social media lit up with hashtags like "Justice for Marcus" and "End Bias in Justice." Community leaders, students, and even a few celebrities joined the cause, amplifying the call for change. As momentum grew, Anthony and Sophia faced mounting resistance. Police officials dismissed their claims, accusing them of undermining law enforcement. Judge Whitman, usually impervious to criticism, issued a rare public statement, calling the allegations against him baseless and inflammatory. But behind closed doors, he was feeling the heat. His staff scrambled to address media inquiries, and whispers of an internal investigation began circulating. The turning point came when Sophia tracked down a key witness the prosecution had overlooked, or intentionally ignored. The store clerk who had identified Marcus during the lineup agreed to speak off the record. In a hushed voice, they admitted, "I wasn't sure it was him. The police said it would be easier if I just went along with it." This bombshell revelation was the missing piece Sophia needed. She worked with Anthony to secure an affidavit from the clerk, bolstering their case for an appeal. At the same time, a forensic expert hired by Anthony reviewed the security footage from the convenience store. Pausing the grainy video, frame by frame, the expert pointed to a detail no one else had noticed: a tattoo on the suspect's forearm, barely visible under the hoodie. Marcus didn't have any tattoos, a fact confirmed by prison records. Deborah's determination only grew stronger. "We're not just fighting for Marcus," she told a local reporter. "We're fighting for every mother who's had to see her child taken away without cause." Her words resonated deeply, and soon the fight for Marcus became a symbol of the broader struggle against systemic injustice. Protesters gathered outside the prison, their chants echoing through the night. The mounting evidence and public pressure forced the state to take action. A formal review of Marcus's case was ordered, and a date for the retrial was set. For Marcus, it was a glimmer of hope in the darkness. Sitting in his cell one evening, he reread a letter from Mia, his little sister. Her carefully written words were shaky, but clear. "I believe in you, Marcus. You're my hero." He folded the letter carefully, placing it under his pillow. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to believe that freedom wasn't just a distant dream. It was within reach. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity on the day of Marcus's retrial. Reporters with cameras jostled for space, alongside protesters who had traded their picket signs for quiet, expectant seats in the gallery. Deborah sat in the front row, her hands clutching Marcus's sister Mia's tightly, while Marcus himself sat beside Anthony Green. Though dressed in a crisp suit, borrowed from a community member, Marcus's eyes betrayed the weariness of a young man who had lived lifetimes in a matter of months. Judge Whitman, however, seemed like a different man. The confident veneer he wore at the original trial was gone, replaced with an uneasiness he couldn't hide. His robe hung heavier on his shoulders that day, as though the weight of his actions and the world's scrutiny pressed down on him. Anthony began his opening arguments with quiet intensity, his voice carrying the kind of gravitas that made everyone lean forward. "This case is about more than Marcus Carter," he said. "It's about a pattern of assumptions, biases, and systemic failures that have jeopardized the life of an innocent young man. Today, we set the record straight." Anthony systematically dismantled the prosecution's case, presenting the findings Sophia and her team had painstakingly uncovered. First, he called the forensic expert to the stand. The expert walked the court through the security footage frame by frame, pointing out the suspect's tattoo, a small but undeniable detail that didn't match Marcus. Next, the store clerk took the stand, visibly nervous but determined. "I wasn't sure it was him," they admitted, their voice trembling. "The police told me I should pick him because it would be easier to close the case. I didn't know what to do." A murmur spread through the courtroom, the weight of the admission sinking in. Deborah closed her eyes, whispering a silent prayer. But Anthony wasn't done. He presented evidence from Sophia's research on Judge Whitman's sentencing history, painting a damning picture of racial bias. Charts and statistics were displayed on the courtroom monitors, showing the stark disparities in sentencing for Black and Latino defendants compared to their white counterparts. "This isn't conjecture," Anthony said, his voice rising. "This is a pattern that has cost innocent people their freedom." The tension reached a boiling point when Anthony turned to Marcus. "Your Honor," he said, gesturing to his client, "Marcus Carter is a young man with dreams, aspirations, and an undeniable right to justice. And today I implore this court to correct its grave error." The prosecutor tried to push back, but their arguments crumbled under the weight of the evidence. Judge Whitman looked increasingly uncomfortable, his hands fidgeting as he listened. The gallery was silent, every breath held as the judge prepared to deliver his decision. Whitman cleared his throat, his voice faltering as he spoke. "After reviewing the evidence presented, it is clear that this court made a grievous mistake. Marcus Carter, you are hereby exonerated of all charges." The words hung in the air for a moment before they sank in. Deborah let out a sob of relief, pulling Mia into her arms. The gallery erupted in cheers, and Marcus, overwhelmed, buried his face in his hands. But it wasn't just a victory for Marcus. It was a moment of reckoning for the system that had failed him. Whitman's words carried an undertone of regret, but for many in the room, it was too little, too late. Justice had been served, but not before a young man's life was nearly destroyed. As Marcus stood to leave the courtroom, a surge of supporters reached out to shake his hand, hug him, and celebrate his freedom. But Marcus's gaze lingered on Judge Whitman, who avoided his eyes, unable to meet the look of quiet determination on the face of the boy he had nearly condemned. The sun shone brightly on the courthouse steps, where a crowd of supporters had gathered to celebrate Marcus's freedom. Deborah held Marcus's hand tightly as they stepped into the open air together, the cheers of the crowd washing over them like a wave. Marcus looked around, overwhelmed by the sea of faces, people who had rallied for him, believed in him, and fought for his innocence when the system had failed. Reporters swarmed him, microphones thrust forward as they peppered him with questions. But Marcus didn't shy away. He stood tall, his voice steady as he addressed the crowd. "I'm grateful to be free," he began, his words carrying the weight of his journey. "But this isn't just about me. It's about the countless others who are still trapped in a system that treats them as guilty until proven innocent." His words sparked another round of applause, but he wasn't done. "We need change," he said, looking directly into the cameras. "Not just for me, but for everyone who's been silenced, overlooked, and discarded. And that change starts today." In the weeks that followed, Marcus's case became a lightning rod for reform. Judge Whitman was placed under investigation for his racially biased rulings, and his name became synonymous with the urgent need for judicial accountability. Advocacy groups seized the momentum, pushing for legislation to prevent cases like Marcus's from happening again. For Marcus, freedom wasn't the end of his story, it was the beginning. He returned to school, determined to pick up where he had left off, but he also dedicated himself to helping others. With Sophia's guidance, he launched the Carter Foundation, an organization aimed at providing legal support for wrongfully accused youth. One of his first speeches as the foundation's leader was at his old high school. Standing in the auditorium, facing students who looked at him with a mix of admiration and hope, Marcus shared his story. "I was just like you," he told them, "dreaming of a better future. Never thinking I'd have to fight so hard just to have one. But I did fight, and I'll keep fighting, not just for me, but for all of us." The crowd erupted in applause, and Marcus smiled. It wasn't the life he had planned, but it was a life with purpose, and as he walked off the stage, he felt something he hadn't in a long time: hope.